Sheryl Sandberg's new book.
It's one of the perpetual questions and dilemmas asked about the American workplace. More than half of the nation's labor force is female, yet only 14% of executive positions are staffed by women. So why are there so few women at the top? That's one of many issues Sheryl Sandberg, the chief operating officer at Facebook, takes on in her new book, Lean In. Sandberg discussed that Sunday on CBS's 60 Minutes as part of her media tour.
I think we're stalled, and I think we need to acknowledge that we're stalled so that we can change it.
One of the biggest names in the Silicon Valley tech world, Sandberg addresses issues on pay, gender stereotypes, and the work-family juggle that working mothers and fathers face. She argues women are too often prone to undercutting their own career potential.
They start leaning back. They say, oh, I'm busy. I want to have a child one day. I could possibly, take on any more. Or I'm still learning on my current job. I've never had a man say that stuff to me.
And she says too few women are willing to promote themselves.
I'm not suggesting women are ambitious. Plenty of women are as ambitious as men. But I am saying, and I want to say it unequivocally and unapologetically, that the data is clear that when it comes to ambition to lead, to be the leader of whatever you're doing, men, boys outnumber girls and women.
Some consider the book a kind of feminist manifesto, but her writing and interviews have spawned a flurry of news headlines across the media world. A major criticism that Sandberg, a multi-millionaire Harvard graduate, protege of former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, and one-time executive at Google, is too much a part of the elite to provide advice that's useful for many working women.
I am not saying that everyone has the resources or opportunities I have. I'm not saying that everyone's husband is going to wake up tomorrow, read a book, and start doing the share. We need to help women own the power they have, learn how to negotiate for raises, get the pay they deserve.
On ABC's Nightline, Sandberg said even she realized that she needed to be more aggressive on her own behalf when she was first offered the Facebook job.
It was my brother-in-law who said to me, what, are you kidding? No one takes the first offer. Go negotiate. And I said, well, if I negotiate, maybe he won't like me, maybe I won't get the job, it won't work out. And he said to me, why are you going to take this job and make less than any man would take? And that was motivating.
Sandberg insists she is not letting employers off the hook, but her emphasis is on motivating women to help themselves by thinking and acting differently. We dive deeper now into the reaction with perspectives from three women who have written on this. Katha Pollitt is a well-known writer, essayist, poet, and critic who writes a column in The Nation. Danielle Belton is the creator and editor of a blog on pop culture and politics called The Black Snob. And Jody Greenstone Miller is a businesswoman who has served in senior roles in both the private sector and government. She's the founder and CEO of Business Talent Group, a consulting firm. Welcome to you all. Katha Pollitt, you've had a mostly positive reaction to what Sandberg has written. What does she bring to this long, simmering discussion?
Well, I think she brings optimism. I think that's so important. I think a lot of the writing and conversation about women and work, it's a real downer. It's, oh, you'll have a baby and then you won't be able to come back, and oh, God, you're going to feel guilty all the time. It's really terrible. Your husband isn't going to help you. You probably won't get that job anyway. And, she brings to it, it's sort of like, well, why don't you do what you can to make sure that that terrible fate does not befall you? Make sure you and your husband are on the same page about equality in the home. Don't marry a man who isn't equal. Be on the lookout for things like that drag down your own confidence, like the imposter syndrome. Who doesn't have that? I'm a fraud, and soon people are going to find out. I think it's all framed in a very positive way. I think that's what people like about it.
Danielle Belton, you were saying to us that you think she has useful advice for a certain group of women, but that she doesn't reach a broader group of working women.
Well, yes, when she's talking about how there's not enough women leaders in some of these CEO positions, which specific women is she referring to? Often who fill these positions come from the Ivy League system. They come from the elite. they come from the upper echelons of society. She's not necessarily talking about women who came from my alma mater, Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. You know, it seems like she's asking women of the elite to make a choice and to choose the harder path by pursuing these higher level positions. The problem is she wrote a book that was for all women, as opposed to narrowing the focus there. And so I feel like that's where a lot of this criticism and confusion is coming from. Because a lot of things she says make sense if she is talking about her own peers. It doesn't necessarily make sense if she's talking about all women in general, because the plight of working class, poor, and middle class women is demonstrably different.
Jody Greenstone Miller, how do you see that?
Well, to me, everything Sheryl says makes sense, and I think people should listen to her. I think if we listen to her, however, we will not solve the problem that she herself so eloquently states, which is how do we get to a world where half of our leaders are women? And I believe if that's our goal, which I think it should be, the problem is women aren't leaning in, not because they don't know how to, but because they don't like the world they're being asked to lean into. And until we really take steps to acknowledge that and address that, I think we're going to be having this conversation 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now.
So you're saying employers have responsibility here, too?
I think employers and our culture. I think it's about what kind of leaders we want. Do we want leaders only who go through this particular path, or do we want to create other routes to leadership that allow for diversity of people, broadly speaking, not just women, but men and women, to get to leadership position with a different set of choices than Sheryl and her peers are making.
Kathy Pollitt, what about these points that there is a role for the work for employers, the folks who are doing the hiring and the promoting, and that there is perhaps a swath of women who are left out of what Sheryl Sandberg is writing?
Well, the first point I think is absolutely true. The main responsibility for changing this situation cannot rest on individual women. There are plenty of women who have leaned in very hard and are just invisible to people who do not want to employ women. They may think they do, but each individual woman, somehow, she's not the right woman. And that's why I would place much more emphasis than Sheryl Sandberg does on things like affirmative action, anti-discrimination suits, quotas. Do you know that the only countries where women are gaining in representation in legislatures are countries that have quotas of how many women should be there, and parties that have quotas of how many women candidates they put up? If things keep going this way in America, it's going to be 70 years before we get to parity in Congress. That's a long time. The second point, I think, is also sort of true. But, you know, I'm not in the running to be a CEO. I'm a writer. I was a freelance writer and an editor at The Nation for most of my life. And I do find some of the things she says quite useful. I think, for example, if you're a school teacher, why is it that the principal is usually a man? You know, a school teacher can become a principal.
Let me stop you there and come back to Danielle Belton. What about this point from Kathy Pollitt that, yes, employers do have a role, but there is something useful for all women to take away from this about how they view themselves in a work role?
Well, the part of the book that I felt that really personally resonated for me was the one about women in confidence, women and being able to clearly state their power. Because often women are socialized to really downplay their gifts. They're socialized to be polite. I often call it apologizing for existing. It's like you've gotten this great job, you do a great job at it, you work very hard and diligently, but then when someone asks you to speak up, you still have this fallback urge to downplay all the hard work that you've done. But you don't say, may I please have a raise? You ask and demand for that raise. And so that portion of the book, I feel, is applicable to lots of women in the career and in the workforce.
But you're also saying, and I'll turn to Jody Greenstone Miller on this, that there are women who really are never going to get to a point of aspiring to be a CEO, and yet they want to be paid fairly for what they're doing, and they want to have equal opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question women should be paid fairly. They should have equal opportunity. I think the thing that concerns me about this advice is, in and of itself, I don't think it will solve the ultimate problem, which is until we have different paths that allow women and men, for that matter, to really rise to leadership levels with different models that don't mean you have to devote a very, very large percentage of your life to your work, I think you will always have this issue, no matter how well women represent themselves, no matter how much confidence they have, the number of women who will choose to play in that league are going to be few and far between.
In fact, you write about how employers could break up the work week, split up job assignments, have people be available even if they're not on the job, literally 40, 80 hours a week. Katha Pollitt, what about the role of men in all this? Are we focusing too much attention on how it's women's responsibility to get this right?
Yes, I think we are. I think, men are half the people, and men run most of these businesses and workplaces where women are not doing as well as they should. Women and men are the fathers. And I think one of the nice things about this book, I have to say, is that she expresses the desire that men do better in this regard in a very positive way. I mean, don't fathers want to spend more time with their children? I think they do. Aren't fathers very important parts of their children's development and upbringing? Yes, they are. So let's have a world where men can do that. I mean, it should be as normal for a man to stay home with children as a woman to stay home with children. And ideally, everybody would do half and half.
Just quickly to our other two guests, Danielle Belton, what is the next thing that needs to happen for women if they are going to have a larger share of the pie when it comes to work opportunity?
It really boils down to family leave. I mean, women are trying to create this work-life balance, and until business accommodates that, it's always going to be an issue.
And Jody Greenstone Miller?
I think we have to open our minds and imagine that we could have a CEO who is working 3 days a week and structuring the world around her to accommodate that in a way that will be good for her and good for the business and good for the men. And that's what I think we should aspire to do. And by the way, Sheryl's in a good position to try to do this. So I'd love to see her try to institute some of that in Facebook.
Well, we thank you all for being with us. Jody Greenstone Miller,